On a strip of sandy soil lies a county called Norfolk. It's Ontario, south coast, you know, and it's surely not remote. If you pass through or spend a day or decide to call it home, you'll see why we love it here and are proud to call it our own. Norfolk, Norfolk, a southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger long. Take in the small town atmosphere, be amazed at all that we grow. Like our kids that go and see the world and can't wait to return home. Drop a line in a placid lake or stroll along the shore. Take a tour on a peaceful country road and bound to be back for more. Of Norfolk, Norfolk, my southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger long. With hard work we built a dream that only willing hands could do. It's on display at our fall fairs and at all the festivals too. Erie beaches, Carolinian forests, where the flower and dogwoods bloom. Patchwork fields and rolling hills, it's just the place for you. Norfolk, Norfolk, a southern county.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Council and Committee meeting for Norfolk County on this Tuesday, February 19th. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? None noted, Mr. Clerk. We do have a camera volunteer today. Mr. Bill Jackson is with us, and he says he would have been gladly with us the last time we were here, but it was such a bad ice storm that he didn't even know how we got here. So he's with us today, though, and we are web streamed and televised. We do have an agenda item change. It will come up as item CII. I believe it's on your blotters there in the buff-colored sheet. It's a deputation from Mr. Rennie Watt regarding the new taxi company. So if you can add that change. Move on to consent items. Oh, can we have a mover and a seconder to make an amendment to the agenda? Councillor Rabbits and Councillor Taylor. Those in favor? Carried. Thank you. So now we'll move to the consent item as 3A. This is the Planning Advisory Committee, a year in review. And is there any discussion or questions with respect to that item? If there is, we'll move it down into the reports. Don't see any hands up, so can I have a mover and a seconder to accept that consent item? Moved by Councillor Rabbits and seconded by Councillor Huffman. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. We have no presentations. We will be having closed session later. We'll move to deputations. It's past 3 o'clock, so we'll start the deputations with 6A, and that is from Mr. Ronald Rusnak. And it's with respect to creation of a multi-use path for the Long Point Causeway. It's on page 21 of the agenda. Welcome, Mr. Rusnak. You have 10 minutes, and at the 9-minute mark, I will let you know that you've got 1 minute left. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. Number one, I hope everybody can read that. Is there anybody that can't read this, that signage? because what's on here, I'll read some of it as I'm going through this little discussion. Occasionally, I'm going to walk up and point out certain things as well. So, bear with me. So, today, primarily what I'm asking for is that Norfolk County have a chance to provide input on the final causeway design. As we all know, there's a bridge and a roadway going in. What hasn't been clear is, to my mind anyway, is the cost of including a multi-use pathway which can be used for obvious reasons as safety number one. We have to think of Long Point as an island. There's only one way in and one way out, right? There's no access roads from some other jurisdiction that's going to come in and save us in case of an accident. So as we can see from this very picture, and if you look closely, there's emergency vehicles blocking both lanes. Now what happens when both lanes in Long Point are blocked? Well, if you don't have a boat, you're not leaving the beach, and you're not going to get to the beach.
Mr. Rusnak, can you speak into the mic, please?
Okay?
Because we are televised, so there's many households listening to your presentation.
Okay, thank you. So, in essence then, what we want to do is have an alternative pathway into Long Point during this new construction phase. Now, in the middle of August, we had, or early part of August, I'm not sure how many of you were aware of the tremendous amount of traffic that we had. We had a heat wave that weekend, and it was also a long weekend. So it was a combination of a perfect storm. So we had many people, thanks to our tourism efforts here, have come to Long Point, and as a result, on this particular weekend, the place was jammed. And when I say jammed, it was jammed bumper to bumper from Highway 59 and Lakeshore Road, along the causeway, and along Erie Boulevard right to the parks. So that's approximately 5 kilometers. So as you can see, item number 2 there, it says everyone in Long Point this weekend was lucky that fire and ambulances didn't need to respond to an emergency. Now, what would have happened? Well, had anything happened, you wouldn't have got in and you wouldn't have got out. It was that simple. There's no room to maneuver, there's no room to pull over. Now, we also had, the police were there, and what was their message? Please turn around, find another beach. That's how bad it was. Now, that's extraordinary, but it's also a sign of things to come if we don't get in front of this problem. So I put in some guesstimates there at the bottom that we had approximately over 2,500 to perhaps as many as 3,000 cars. So where were they? Well, they were on the roadway by and large. They were in parking lots by and large. Everybody was cramming to get into Long Point. So again, the idea of just one access point, that's pretty risky. Now, what we have here is some items from our consultants. And I want to draw your attention to the first paragraph there. I know it's not all that legible from this distance, but it says, several comments received have indicated support for a multi-use path or trail to the west, right? It was recommended that an off-road multi-use pathway or similar undertaking be investigated. Okay, so our own consultants are recommending that. Now, paragraph 2, they go on to explain a little bit more about it. They say, additional degree of safety. Well, we just talked about that. And comfort for recreational cyclists and pedestrians. Well, we all know the causeway is a great parking lot, especially during bird migration, when people park alongside the road and take a look-see. It's very illegal, but it happens frequently. I've taken pictures of motorists doing that. So if anybody has an issue with that, it happens all the time. Now, so the idea of a pathway will allow tourists, bird watchers, and the like to use the pathway. They don't need to park their car in a dangerous, narrow roadway. They can simply park the car at the beginning or end of the causeway and make a short journey and do their bird watching. So now we're providing convenience for tourists. Now, at the very bottom of this, it talks about would not preclude the option to implement a future multi-use path. That's a little of a convoluted statement, but I think what it means is that in the process of building the road, people, the engineers, the construction people can lay granular shoulders, for example, and or some sort of a dirt piling or something of that nature. So right away in this report, we're seeing there's a little bit of wiggle room for a pathway to be constructed. Now, I brought this up. This is from the Parsons quote. And I want to point out a few things that I've investigated. Well, first of all, you can't see it clearly on this, unfortunately, but there are talks about quantity. They talk about asphalt walkway, and they also talk about a boardwalk. Well, the first thing that sticks out is they talk about 4,300 meters of these combination boardwalk and or walkway. Well, the causeway is 3 kilometers. So this quote, when I look at it, is skewed a little bit because it's only 3,000 meters, and they're quoting 4,300 meters. So that's a little bit off. But the bigger thing here, is they talk about land acquisition. Now, to me, that's a deal killer because they put about a $1.5 million price tag on this. And to me, I did a little investigation, and I spoke directly with the consultants on this. And now, when I spoke with consultants, I spoke with both Parsons and third-party consultants. So I didn't just deal with the people writing this report. I went to outside experts who also had understanding of this. And if you look at it, the first thing that comes to mind is building the pathway at the same time as a road will contribute to significant cost savings. Fantastic. We're concerned about money here. We don't want to spend any money. We don't want to delay the project in any way, shape, or form. But we do have resources that we can use to make this pathway a viable option. Now, there's no reason to hesitate. All we have to do is get our design team from Norfolk County to sit down with Parsons and say, hey, how can we make this happen? Now, a component of this, the big deficit here, is how much land do we require? Well, the consultant has gone on to report that it would cost, they call it property acquisition, and they give it a number, and they give it a dollar value, which is $100 a square meter, and it comes out to $1.2 million. Well, we're not really sure if we need that money. This is, to me, it's our best guess scenario, and one that stretches, I would say, some of the math here. And, for example, because right below that, you see surprise the amount of land required and cost per square meter. So the consultant used, let's say, I will say a high figure for now. It's $100. Well, why would it be $100? When we read the last sentence there, it says, would hope that these lands are public lands and not suitable for development as they could be acquired for minimum costs. Okay, so what have we heard? We've heard that it costs this much. But then we heard from another independent consultant, maybe it's way over guesstimate or way over market value. So let's get some goalposts going here. Let's get some comparisons. Now, at this point, I'm going to walk up to the screen and I'm going to yell ever so quietly, but I want to point out a few things.
One minute left, Ron. 1 minute left.
So a third-party expert shows a right-of-way is not an issue. Now, directly from the consultant, it says areas to be acquired are beside the Big Creek Bridge. Now, that's a far cry from the 4,000 meters requested here. So now, how much area are we talking about? We really don't know at this point. We can see how Elmer and Elgin County have solved this problem. We got government and community working together. And here we have some pathways, wildlife pathways, that could also be combined with the boardwalk, where we're trying to protect, let's say, wild animals, et cetera, from crossing. So this is a wildlife crossing barrier, and it can also be modified and is already included in the budget. So no further costs are required in the event that a small boardwalk is required. So if we allow our Norfolk County staff to do a little bit of investigation, we may find perhaps that we can get 40, 60, or 80% of the pathway to be built with little or no increase in the budget. And our aim is to do it at no increase to the budget. And I personally would step up with fundraising efforts if, let's say, $100,000 or $200,000 were needed at the end of the project. Because to me, we have a jewel here. We should capitalize on it.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Very good presentation. Now we're up to question time. To the deputation, Councillor Martin.
Oh, excuse me, if I can get a glass of water.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Rusnak, after you grab a quick drink, no rush. I firstly just wanted to say that I live in Port Dover, and through the campaign I heard quite a bit about community members looking for more active trails, especially out on Radical Road and whatnot. And I know that there are a lot of cyclists that would go as far to ride all the way out to the causeway. So I think that this is an important cause, and that there would be a lot of community interest for an addition like this. I wondered if you could flip your presentation back to the picture and just provide a little bit more information on that diagram that you were speaking to earlier.
This one?
Yes, please.
We have a dimension, and Norfolk County owns this dimension. So we're the ultimate proprietors of how this is built, not the consulting company. So there's been some innovations. Let's say for the conservationists, which is this wildlife pipe. It's sort of like a pipe that goes into the ground, and it's already been approved by environmental organization, uses the marshes. And in essence, it's already in the budget too. So this is where that structure would go. So what we're seeing though is, if we move this 1.5 meters, for example, we still have, this is the multi-use fill, which is 3 meters. We still have room to put our multi-use pathway. Like, all it takes is a little bit of willpower, a little bit of sitting down and designing and saying, where can we wiggle this in? Now, there's other innovations that have to be done. There are some of the utilities, half-lane cable, for example. Well, where are they going to put that? Well, ultimately, they might put it under this section of the road. I don't know for sure. Ultimately, they might put it here. But what I see is they are sources of future funding if we need it. Because let's say it's Tech Bank or Bell Canada or whomever, they're going to want to have their name on this sort of dedication or dedication trail, whatever, that says that they sponsored and supported this. So now we're talking to business if we need to, and we're also reaching into businesses' pockets who have a direct, they will benefit. Bell Canada will benefit if they put that line in, for example. So let's let them contribute for signage and pay for this. I think that this day and age, there's no.
Okay. Is there not a laser at the podium that we can use?
I don't know if that new system has a laser attached to it. It's
Okay.
are in a transitional period
Yeah.
between two systems.
We were trying to test that earlier, Mike.
Okay, good. Further questions? Don't see any hands up. Thank you, Ron. I'm going to ask the Public Works Department General Manager here his comments with respect to your proposal and where we should go with it. Okay, thanks very much. You may be seated.
And could I just ask one question? When might a report like that be completed and available for public view?
We'll hear from the General Manager of Public Works and Environmental Services.
Okay.
Okay, hopefully you can answer that. Mr. Baird?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Rusnak, for your deputation. Mr. Rusnak and I have had prior discussions about this concept, and it started back last year during the council break before you guys were appointed to your roles now, and so this has been the first opportunity to do so. So we'll have an information report coming up very soon just on the status of where we're at with the Causeway Bridge and the Causeway reconstruction. The environmental assessment piece continues right now. It will be wrapped up shortly, and I think it's very important that if council is interested in the concept that was shared with you this afternoon, that staff be directed to review it further with Parsons. Parsons is the consultant that is dealing with the class environmental assessment, and we can refine some ideas and locations and so on. It's ultimately up to this council. If you want to see a multi-use pathway that is off the paved portion of the roadway, you certainly have that opportunity. There are costs associated, but there may also be some benefits from other funding opportunities. So I would recommend that we just receive it as information and that staff be directed to review the proposal and share it with Parsons at this point. And Mr. Rusnak suggested, when would a report come back? We would follow that. The report would actually be the final recommendations in the environmental assessment that would be before you. That way, everything's taken into consideration for a final decision. I would suspect that would be a month and change out.
Okay, thank you. First of all, can I have a mover and a seconder to receive the deputation? Councillor Taylor and Councillor Rabbit of the deputation of Mr. Rusnak. And now I will go to Mayor Chop.
Just curious, Mr. Bear, what kind of costs we would be looking at from Parsons? Is this something that would be baked in, or?
Through the chair.
Just don't want to see another $12,000.
No, it's of course, Madam Mayor, you're absolutely right. No, this is just information collecting, public input. It's all part of what would be normally expected through the EA. It just so happens that Mr. Rusnak has taken his time to raise these comments with them, so they are part of the public record, and they will form part of the final class environmental assessment that will come back to you, and it will help formulate what the tender will look like that we will be going out, what would be included in that, the road works, the bridge, potential walkway, and so on.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I guess part of my concern is, do we not have some people on staff that might be able to go and do a little bit of background kind of work into this rather than putting it off to the consulting company?
Again, through the chair, I understand the question. We're not out to spend any more money than we have to. Parsons has been engaged by council to do the environmental assessment, which is to capture all the public input, the design ideas, the pros and cons, and so on. We can take a linear length and look at other municipalities or other companies that have constructed something like is what's being proposed, an elevated boardwalk of sorts. We can get some linear distances and come up with some cost estimates. I think that would be prudent before we embark on developing the final tender document. What is it the council wants to see? In that schematic, it shows the walkway as being essentially on grade. I would suggest in its current fashion right now, it would be underwater with the high water levels. We don't want that. So that option of being elevated may be one that would be preferred. But as it stands right now, we're looking at the paved shoulders. But again, these are just options. Council will make that final decision based on that input. We have to do the class environmental assessment to satisfy the approval process through the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks.
So through you again, Mr. Chair, will we be able to see this? Is this kind of a general report on the causeway? Are you looking, I know we discussed this, but are we looking at that coming to the next council meeting? Or I think we really need to get, for all of council, all of these issues out on the table here, including, whether, we're running conduit lines out there, or, what we're doing with walkways, the direction that this council wants to go. And I just feel it's kind of, we're pushing it further and further out when these are decisions that maybe we should be making together as a group right now, as opposed to 2 months from now.
Okay, so through the chair, we're not losing time. This is a process that has to be followed to arrive at a decision or an outcome that you're going to see that will allow us to go ahead to design work for tendering and construction. I will provide you with the timeline where we're at when the decision points will be before you. And you're right, I mean, we could make that decision right now. This is what you want to see, but I would urge you to wait until you see all the input and all the different options, and then you can select your preferred position at that point. It's not much further at this point. We did have to do an addendum to the environmental assessment, but that process is winding down. And we hope to be in a position where we're ready to send a notice of completion and bring that report to you.
So again, just the addendum, there's some background that I don't know that everybody's aware of, but that was something that shouldn't have happened, we should have known from the very beginning. But in terms of the report, what I'm looking for is I'm sure Mr. Michele is inundated with questions surrounding the causeway, as am I. And potentially other councillors, what date can we look at for a report to be coming to council on the causeway? Even if it's just a general overview of here's where Parsons at, these are the things they're looking at, and that way if they're looking at items that this council doesn't want to consider and wants to go a different direction, then perhaps we could speed the process up by, putting forth what we're looking at doing.
Through the chair, I'll endeavor to have an information memo before you in a couple of weeks that will outline where we're at, what are the next steps, what's the timeline, how we see things unfold.
So let's say the CIC meeting.
I will get it here, Mr. Chairman, at the earliest opportunity. That's all I can say at this point.
Okay, nothing further, Mr. Chair.
I know that there was an open house a few weeks ago. I think all the councillors received that information.
For the environmental assessment?
It was a public open house with respect to rebuilding of the causeway.
It was the addendum for the AEA assessment, and that addendum occurred because the engineering company did not take into account the age of the structure at the time, which was well known at the very beginning of the project, with all due respect.
Okay. Councillor Michele.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Baird. I just happened to notice all of the sample pictures of similar structures like this. None of them run, parallel to a roadway. Are there any additional safety requirements that we would have to take into account that might make this proposal slightly different than the other similar examples we have in other jurisdictions?
The chair, Councillor Michele, I think a number of those images are just straight out of Google, so they're not exactly what we would look for. I would think there would be access or egress points along the way. You wouldn't just get on simply at the crest of the hill in Port Rowan and have the only way you could get off it is to go to the causeway. There would probably be relief points. There would be a detail in as it crosses the actual bridgeway, whether that's on the bridge or adjacent to or affixed to, something like that. That would all be part of the design, the different options or ideas that could come out of that.
Thank you.
Mayor Chop.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Baird, have we reached out to Wildlife Services before? I mean, some of these pathways are amazing when they're built up and people can walk through nature and so on. Have we actually has anybody from staff here contacted them to see whether they would be willing even to donate the land and build the trail in conjunction with Norfolk County?
Through the chair, there's some great examples on Peely Island. If you Google that, Peely Island Boardwalk, you're probably see a number of options. How that was done, I can't really comment. I know, I won't speak for Mr. Cridland, but his experience dealing with Canada Wildlife Services as it relates to the marsh by Hastings Drive, we have a good relationship with those folks, but there is quite a process for the sort of the sale or transfer of land. I think that would be a very costly, lengthy process. But again, back to the schematic, we do have a road allowance that would effectively be 100 feet from property to the property line. And if we can work within that, you still have the benefit, the vista that you'd have off a walkway into the marshland, but you would not be caught into lengthy and costly processes to acquire land that would be federally owned. That I think would be even a bigger job. But if we could work within that corridor, that's something that might be more achievable.
That's quite possible, and I'm not disagreeing with that. I think that one thing we have to consider is just whether a paved shoulder is really going to do it, as we've just heard, and we see all these other amazing examples in other counties where they've sort of put some creative vision into it. My question, though, again, was just simply whether or not somebody from Norfolk County has reached out to Wildlife Services.
Through the chair, I'm not specifically aware of that. We do, again, we have that rapport. I believe Mr. Rusnak has done that. I won't speak on his behalf, but he knows many of the players in that area, so I think it's safe to assume that they have been contacted.
Okay.
Councillor Van Passen.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Canadian Wildlife Service already has a lot of trails, viewing platforms, bathrooms. The infrastructure is there already on their property. What is lacking is a place to park so you can go enjoy all of that stuff. So, to provide, does a paved shoulder provide enough for a bike trail, walking trail, or do you want to separate, sort of delineate it with a separation? I think it'd be more the question, but, to build raised platforms, boardwalks and all that, the Wildlife Service has a bunch of that there already. It's just to be able to get to them is a bigger problem on the causeway.
Okay, anybody else? Mr. Beard, you had made a suggestion for a recommendation, and I'm going to ask the clerk to read it, and maybe we'll get a mover and a seconder for it. If not, we'll continue the debate.
Mr. Baird will hopefully correct me if I'm a bit off here, that staff be directed to include different walkway options as a consideration for council within the review of preferred options in relation to the Long Point Causeway redevelopment.
Mr. Chair, if I could add to the clerk, I think it's important, and that this information be shared with Parsons, the consultant on this project.
Okay. Councillor Rabbits?
Thank you, and through the chair, I'd be prepared to move that recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Geisens? Do you all understand the recommendation? Any further debate? No? Those in favor? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rusnak, for coming forward with your knowledge on this project, and hopefully it will move forward. We'll go to our next deputation, and that is from Ms. Michelle Rashenko. It's regarding affordable housing, and you'll find that on page 33. Is Ms. Michelle Rashenko here? Don't see her. Maybe she'll be coming late. Well, having her not here, we'll move on to the third deputation. This is Norman Proctor, Why Wait Taxi and Delivery. He's going to speak regarding the new taxi company. Mr. Proctor, you have 10 minutes, sir, and I'll notify you at the 9-minute mark with respect to your time limit.
It shouldn't take too long. Norman Proctor, I'm the president of Why Wait Taxi. We have an operation in Tilsonburg, and we just recently opened in Delhi on Main Street. We are the largest taxi provider in the area. We have over 15 cabs between our two locations. 7 are tagged for Norfolk County. I am against another company coming. Norfolk County has enforcement issues with the current companies we already have. This company that currently has applied has been running illegally for weeks now. pretending to be a transportation company like Simcoe Transportation that recently opened across the street, trying to get around the bylaw. In business, you should have some integrity, and when you go to open a business, you don't operate it prior to getting everything you need to operate such business. If you want to be a taxi company, you go through the bylaw. Counties or municipalities were afforded that right to restrict private enterprise. This is one of the few things that council can restrict, is the taxi company. That is for public safety, because we're driving around vulnerable people, seniors, we drive around children, people with drug addictions, like we drive around people of all sorts. And obviously in Norfolk County, you guys are very strict on the criminal. There's no criminal convictions whatsoever for a taxi driver. Some, like Tillsonburg, is 5 years free. Some areas are, it's every council's different on how they operate with the taxi. Now, since Norfolk County has become one entity, Simcoe used to have just courtesy taxi. For many, many years, it was just courtesy. Now you've opened up into this large municipality with 65,000 people, and now everyone with a cell phone and a vehicle wants to be a taxi driver. Now, for enforcement purposes, that's impossible for anyone to try to regulate. We have, right now in this company, I believe Delhi has 7, we have 7, so there's 14 taxis in Delhi alone. There's 5,000 people in Delhi. KTN out of Tillsonburg is the largest plate holder in Norfolk County, and they don't even operate here. So the west part of this county is heavily covered with taxis. I do understand that there are a lot of medical runs, and that is what takes up a lot of taxis, and it does. Ontario Works, ODSP, those are the ones that everyone wants. We do a lot of them. Delhi Taxi does a lot of them. They're out there, and they are lucrative. They're basically guaranteed work in an industry where work isn't always guaranteed. This is why there's companies trying to open. I'm asking council to deny it, not based on Renee, because Renee actually is a nice guy. I don't mind Renee. But how many taxi companies can survive in this county with 65,000 people? We have combined 25 taxis in Tillsonburg with 14,000 people. And our coverage in Tillsonburg is fantastic. Our competitor there, KTN, they do their job. There's 2 good companies, and the system there, it works. I would like council to really look at the taxi bylaw and the transportation bylaw in general. Transportation's a lot more than it used to be. There's Uber now, there's taxis, there's different things. But you guys have the right to regulate the industry. But the way it's been regulated with the last council, it's not appropriate. You have a bunch of cabs, like one cab out there. Guardian has 1 cab. There's a guy in Dover with 1 cab. Like, I understand, but these companies aren't open 24/7. A lot of municipalities require 24/7 service to even operate a taxi company. That's not regulated here. I can open 7 to 3 Monday to Friday and call it a week. But if every company does that, how does a regular person get a taxi cab in Norfolk County, which is the problem? And if you try to call a cab on a weekend here, you're absolutely right, you won't get one, because there's only 4 or 5 of them out there. And that's been caused by the bylaw, because there's nothing in the bylaw to stop it. So if we just have 50 cabs on during the day and no regulation of the overnight, you're never going to have proper cab service in this county. So, it just came off. So basically, that's my question: is how are you guys going to enforce another cab company, which would make it 10 cab companies, 50 cabs between them, 51 if he gets 2 licenses. So,
Okay, ready for questions?
yes, sure.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Proctor. Questions to the deputation? Mayor Chop first.
Through you, Mr. Chair. You did mention that people can't get cabs sometimes.
Yes.
So if people can't get cabs sometimes,
Yes.
then it seems tough for me right now to say that we shouldn't support another cab company coming into Norfolk.
Absolutely.
However, that said, I think that there's a bigger issue, like you pointed out, which is in terms of our own bylaws of how these cab companies continue to operate.
Yes.
So in my view, there are two separate issues here
They are,
today.
absolutely.
One is Renee's application, and you've just said in your own presentation that that people are still struggling to get cabs, so it's difficult for me to say, well, I'm going to deny somebody's
Yeah.
application when you've just said that there's room for it. On the other hand, I do appreciate your comments that, we need, as a council, need to look at the bylaws, and I think that one thing that perhaps would be interesting would be for you to come back. Mr. Colebrook has also approached me as well.
Okay.
And say, here's how I think you guys should be regulating
Yes.
the cab industry. These are some ideas that we see, and then we can treat that as an entirely separate issue. And if there are cab companies that, as a result of these changes in the bylaws, don't survive that transition, Mr. Watt's company included,
Yes.
then, then that's a decision at that point in time that we make.
I think
So
that's
I
wonderful.
appreciate your statements,
Absolutely.
but that's just where kind of
Yep.
I'm coming from in terms of his application and my support of it.
Fair
But
enough.
I am very interested in hearing more on the cab driver's perspective on how we
Okay.
change our bylaws to appropriately manage that in the future.
Thank you.
Further questions to the deputation? I'm sorry, I can't take your, it's only for council. Okay. Anyway, okay, I guess there's no more questions from councilors, so you may be seated.
Okay.
Mr. Proctor?
Thank you.
I'll receive them individually. A mover and a seconder to receive the deputation, Councilor Rabbits and Councilor Michelli. Seconder, those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. We will now call on our second deputation regarding cabs, and that will be from Adam Bright and Rob Dow, Delhi Taxi, regarding the new Delhi Taxi Company. Please take the podium. You have 10 minutes, sir, and state your name, please.
Rob Dow.
Rob Dow?
Yep.
Okay.
I'd like to thank the chair and council for the opportunity to be heard on this matter. Delhi Taxi is a young company, still learning the market trends, and we're carrying a lot of startup costs as well as keeping up with ongoing expenses. And there's been a lot of changes in the taxi industry in Norfolk in the past year with two large brand companies acquiring plates and being pretty open about their interest in operating in Norfolk. We've had Y-Wait open an office in Delhi recently, as well as Green Line Taxi, which maintains a strong presence in Delhi. We have noticed a decline in local calls, but it is too early to really know the full effects. We just want the opportunity to grow as a business. I'm sure all the established taxi companies in Norfolk want the option to grow, and by further congesting the market with another taxi company, we won't really get that opportunity. That's all.
Okay. Ready for questions. Councilor Martin first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Rob. Are you open 24/7 right now?
We are open 24 hours on Fridays and Saturdays in the summertime.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had to cut back our hours in the winter.
And through you, Mr. Chair, would you agree that the bylaws set by Norfolk County right now are hindering any growth through your business? That it's not necessarily just amount of other companies who might be in direct competition with you, or would you disagree with that?
No, I don't think that the current bylaws are restricting us.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, other than the very strict, it's almost impossible to find drivers. I don't feel that people who have petty crimes, that could be from 20 years ago, should be affecting their ability to work today. And it's making it really, really hard to keep good, dependable drivers.
Thank you. Councillor Hoffman?
Thank you, Chair Columbus. Through you to the deputation. Rob, could you just expand on that a little bit? So right now, then, the current criminal reference check that's required for cab drivers in Norfolk County, that entails everything? Any kind of conviction?
Anything.
So
Absolutely.
shoplifting when you were 19,
Absolutely can keep you from driving a taxi today.
when you're 52 or
Yes,
whatever?
exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
so I can see where with a lot of the medical runs and with the vulnerable sector population, definitely in terms of, where those there'd be certain crimes
Sure,
that
I understand we
obviously.
need a standard, but
Okay, because I have previous experience where in a employment situation that I was in, that we did require criminal reference checks, and it was with the vulnerable sector, but we still had some leeway as to whether it really was something that affected their ability
Yes.
to. So yes, a shoplifting crime when they were 19 was not going to affect their status with working with a vulnerable sector person when
Yes,
they were
absolutely.
50. Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, I know there has been a case before Norfolk with respect to, you could go to the bylaw appeals committee to get that criminal charge lifted off the record, so I know that has happened in the past. Any further questions? Mr. Michelli, Councilor Michelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add, though, that we are not talking about criminal offenses for which a person has received a pardon, right?
Mhm.
So, I'm just hoping that, anybody who has a past offense understands that they are able to get a pardon within a period of time after the offense. So hopefully,
that is a lengthy and expensive process. And it's not available to, especially when we're talking about somebody who's unemployed at the time, and they're seeking employment.
okay, I don't want to correct you, Mr. Dow, but I don't think there's a huge expense involved in this. Maybe for driving taxi, but I just as
To get a pardon.
yes.
We did have one of our drivers go through that, and it was fairly expensive.
I know it's at least several $100s.
Okay,
Yeah,
It was 2,000.
okay.
it's $2,000.
It was $2,000 all
Okay,
said and
well,
done.
thank you. That's information I didn't have.
Okay.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, thank you.
Mayor Cha.
I know this might be a bit unusual, but I'm unusual. Would it be possible to perhaps pick a date, like maybe April the 2nd? There's another council and committee meeting that day, since a number of the cab drivers are here with us today. And perhaps we could plan to hear some deputations all collectively on that day in regards to how we might amend our bylaws to reflect the changing times here. And the only reason I'm kind of throwing, if that date doesn't work for you guys, but I'm just thinking they're all here right now, and so better to pick a time to.
Okay, you're speaking about changing the bylaws.
Well, that they bring forward, just coming a deputation to council with their ideas on how we as council might look to make changes to the bylaws. So we wouldn't be making a change to the bylaw that night, but we would be looking for input from members of how we could improve our industry.
Chime in on this.
Just if it assists committee a little bit, my staff and myself we try to have a very good relationship with the taxi industry. We've had a number of changes over the last couple of years, and we work very well together. So we don't have any issue. We're doing an overall bylaw business licensing review this summer. We don't have any issue working with them and working out what options we can bring forward for council to consider. The one challenge that we have that complicates it somewhat is if we change the structure too much. Right now our structure is one where Uber can come in, and any license for Uber would have to go through the same business licensing process. But if we tweak it too much and get too far away from that, then we can get into an issue. But certain things I've heard, and I mean, I've sat through the bylaw appeals committee before where we have somebody come forward for something like demerit points and stuff like that. So if we still, it's important, I think, to maintain the bylaw appeals committee review, but if we remove the the requirement to pay for that appeal, then I think that kind of meets us midway, because it's like a $200 fee to have that meeting. So there are a lot of options that we can consider and bring forward to council, and obviously work with them to bring forward options here, so that council couldn't decide something on the one day and everybody could come here and it would be one meeting, rather than council direct us to go rewrite the bylaw, and we don't know if we get it 100% what council wants.
Mayor Chop.
I'm going to kind of stand my ground that I think it would be interesting to hear from the cab owners themselves as to, I think that these frustrations have been going on for some time. Mr. Colebrook, who obviously we know is active in the last election here, he himself has reached out and wanted to talk about the issues, and there's frustration there. And so I don't see the harm in council hearing from a couple of we don't need to hear from every cab driver in Norfolk, but from hearing from a couple that would like to express their concerns of where they feel things have kind of gone wrong here. So it's certainly not a knock on the clerk's department as to what's gone on in the past, but I, for one, would like to hear from citizens of Norfolk where that's their business and see how we might be able to do things better for them.
Mayor Chop, you're not suggesting that we do not deal with the application today before us?
No, we should deal with the application before us today.
Yep.
And again, there's no motion here, there's no nothing. I'm just suggesting that perhaps April the 2nd, to the cab drivers that are in the room, might be a good time to come forward. So, submit your request for a deputation
Okay,
the week before.
I understood it that you perhaps wanted the report delayed till April the 2nd.
No.
So we're going to deal with that.
Correct.
Okay, so maybe we can come back to that. We'll park that and
Perfect.
just come back to it, okay? And any other questions for the deputation? No? I've got one, and it's puzzled me because 4 or 5 years ago, we were struggling to keep 1 or 2 taxi cabs alive in Delhi. And now, how many is there, did you say?
9.
14?
14.
So
It's only-
why the
yeah,
big
in Del-
change over a 4 or 5 year period? Where's all that business coming from?
I wish I could tell you. I have no previous experience in this industry.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, and a lot of people have questioned it, so. Yeah. Yes, Mayor Chop?
Councillor Columbus, would you not, was some of that business, was there not an investigation at some point into some of the traveling related to the health sector and so on a couple years ago during your term as councillor?
I cannot recall.
Okay, I think that there was some work that had gone on and perhaps some sort of fraudulent basis for taxi cabs and so on. So,
Okay, thank you. If there's no more questions, you may be seated, sir. Need a mover and a seconder to receive the deputation of Mr. Dow, Councillor Rabbits, and Councillor Taylor. Those in favor? Carried. Thank you. And now we'll move to the application. Can we go to 3C first?
wasn't he
Aye,
here
aye,
to
aye.
talk or something?
Which one? Okay, we're going to go to the final deputation that we've added, 3CII. Okay. Mr. Watts, are you here? May I take the podium? And you have 10 minutes, sir.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Thanks to the mayor for moving this along. It's been a long wait. You took care of most of my speech for me. And that's what I want to say was that most of the problems that I'm hearing with the taxi companies aren't against me, but against some of the bylaws and some of the other taxi companies. So I would have suggested that that's dealt with at a different time or at a different case. There was nothing I really seen in the papers that give reason for me not to have a taxi of my own. CD98 run a ad today online, and of the 40 comments, everybody's for another taxi company. Everybody's tired of waiting for taxis, bad service, everything, anything and everything. And I mean, that happens in every business. I can understand other taxi companies not wanting a new taxi company to take some of their business or to give them competition. But at the end of the day, the needs of the community aren't being met. I've drove taxi for going on 3 years now. I drove for Delhi Taxi, and I love it. It's the best job I've ever had by far. Not the best money I've made by far, but the best job I've ever had. So yeah, I really don't have a whole lot more to say, other than there is a need for more taxi companies. It's a growing market right now in Norfolk. Medical runs and ODSP and OW are big runs. There's just more and more of them all the time. Yeah, I'm ready to roll with mine. I have drivers, I have cabs. I just need approval from the county.
Ready for questions, sir?
Yes.
Questions to Mr. Watt, Councilor Rabbits, and then the mayor.
Thank you, Chairman Columbus, and through the chair to our deputation. I was hoping you could elaborate or expand on your hours of operation. We know how many cabs you are proposing with these 2 vans, but I was hoping to have just a little bit of feedback in terms of weekend hours, winter hours, things of that nature, what you're proposing with this new company.
Right now to start up, I'm thinking on just 7 in the morning till 11 at night, 7 days a week, and we'll go from there. I mean, if somebody books something on off time, we would do that as well. Or if it justifies being open the final hours, I'll do that as well.
Mayor Chop?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wondering if you just could, when did your application start? When did you put your application in? How many months ago?
October the 5th or the 7th, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. October 7th.
October 7th, okay. And just so that everybody else is aware in terms of, I appreciate your thanks. I managed to forward it on to the right people, so it was the clerk's department that did take care of it. But I just want to highlight this for sort of the members of council and so on. I think that is a long time for somebody to wait for an answer to put in an application in October for a cab company, and now we're into February, and it actually wasn't even going to be heard until March, until we kind of moved the process along. So again, I just wanted to highlight that for future discussions, though, so that people, other councilors here are aware that this is kind of a broken, it's a flaw in Norfolk County's procedures that we need to start to address, because that's a long time to wait from October to February to get an answer. So I appreciate your patience with the system.
Okay. Further questions? And let's see. Yes, I have one, Mr. Watts. The other 2 cab companies actually have a headquarters in Delhi, one on Main Street, one on King Street. Where will your headquarters be located in the town of Delhi?
Right now, they're out of my house in Delhi.
Which is, what's the address there?
37 Talbot Road.
37 Talbot Road. Okay, thank you. Okay. If there's no further questions, you may be seated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Need a mover and a seconder to receive the deputation of Mr. Watt, Councilor Rabbits, and Councilor Geisens. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Okay, we do have a report here to deal with next. First, I'm going to ask the clerk to clarify why the wait till this date here. The file was originally started October the 7th. Mr. Clerk.
Through you, Chair Columbus. Firstly, just to apologize, Council Service